They always said I was the quiet one, but they were the ones who taught me silence. The first time I heard my mother cry, I thought it was because of me. I was 5. The first time I heard her say she wished I had never been born, I was 6. And the day I found out why I never fit in, why every birthday felt like an apology, why my father looked at me like a burden, it was the day everything shattered. My name is Alyssa Hart, and I was never supposed to exist. Not in that house, not in that family, not in their story. They kept me close, but only to keep their shame hidden. From the outside, we looked like any other family. Dad worked in finance, Mom was part of every church committee. And me? I was the quiet one, the girl with the lowered eyes and the awkward smiles. The one who always stood a little off to the side in family photos. They had 2 older sons, Greg and Nathan. Smart, loud, athletic. They got trophies. I got cold stares. They got celebrated. I got silenced. I used to think maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I was born broken. Maybe I wasn't lovable. But it wasn't until I turned 16 that I realized it was never about who I was, but what I was. It started with a box in the attic. Dusty, sealed, forgotten, or maybe hidden. I was looking for an old photo album for my school project. Mom told me to stay out of the attic. She always did. But that day, something pulled me up there. There were birth certificates, papers, a letter addressed to someone named Judith, but it wasn't my mother's handwriting. And the envelope had my name on it. I remember just standing there, hearing the wind rattle the windows, my heart pounding like I'd stepped into someone else's memory. The letter wasn't long, but it said enough. She doesn't know yet, and I don't think she ever should. She deserves better than this lie, but she was the result of one night I never told you about. It was signed by my father. The air left my lungs. My fingers went numb. I stared at those words, result of one night, like they were a sentence carved into my soul. That's what I was? A result? No wonder my mother couldn't look at me. No wonder my brothers treated me like a ghost in my own home. I thought about every time she sighed when I walked into the room. Every time she pushed my plate away at dinner and told me to eat later. Every time my father picked Greg over me, even for school pickup. Suddenly, it all made sense. I wasn't just unwanted. I was a reminder, a living, breathing mistake they couldn't erase. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, the letter tucked beneath my mattress, my whole identity unraveling one sentence at a time. But the thing about breaking is that sometimes you start to find the pieces you want to keep. The next morning, I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. I smiled. I went downstairs like nothing had changed, because I knew now it never had. They had always seen me as the mistake, the one they couldn't hide, but I was done playing along. The hardest part wasn't knowing I was unwanted. It was pretending I didn't know. For weeks, I walked through that house like a stranger in borrowed skin. They laughed over dinner, talked about Greg's football scholarship, Nathan's new job. No one asked how I was doing. They never really had. But now, I didn't expect it, because now I understood exactly who I was in their story. The extra chapter they wished they could tear out. I started noticing things. My mother would sigh when I entered a room, like the weight of me was just too much. My father didn't speak unless it was about chores or grades. And even then, he never looked at me, not directly. Only the corners of his eyes, like I was a shadow he couldn't quite erase. And the boys, Greg and Nathan, they mocked me in whispers. Charity case, Greg once muttered when I asked to borrow a textbook. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because screaming wouldn't change what I was to them. But I was changing, quietly, deliberately. I started documenting everything. Phone recordings, bank statements. That letter from the attic, I scanned it, encrypted it, saved it in 5 places. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, but I knew it was mine. I started spending more time at the library. The school counselor thought I was studying for college. I wasn't. I was reading about emancipation laws, inheritance rights, family court precedents. And late one night, I discovered something that nearly made my hands shake. My name was listed on a dormant trust, created by Judith Hale, the same Judith from the letter, the woman whose name wasn't my mother's, but somehow had tied herself to me in silence. Judith Hale had passed away when I was 4, an obituary buried in digital archives, no photos, no relatives listed, just one sentence that burned into my mind. She is survived by her daughter, me. I confronted my father first, not with anger, but with cold, careful truth. I asked him if he knew Judith Hale. His eyes froze, just for a second. Then he said, "That name doesn't matter." But he didn't deny it. He didn't ask why. He knew, and so did I. 3 days later, I found the old family lawyer's contact info. My mother thought I was babysitting that night. I was sitting in a lawyer's office, letter in hand, voice steady. "I want to know what was left to me," I told him. "I want to know everything." He leaned back, studied me for a long moment, and then he opened a file I wasn't supposed to know existed. It held Judith Hale's will, and at the top, in black ink, it said, "All assets, savings, and property are to be given to my daughter, Alyssa Monroe." Not Hart, Monroe. She gave me her name and everything she had. The woman they never spoke of. The woman whose name was erased from every photo. The woman who was the real reason I existed. I walked home that night with fire in my chest. Because for the first time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I wasn't their mistake. I was her daughter. And they were about to find out what that meant. The house felt smaller after that night. Not physically, emotionally. Like their lies were crowding every corner, trying to trap me back into silence. But I was done being small, done being quiet. I didn't tell them right away what I knew. Instead, I observed my mother's secretive phone calls, the way my father locked his desk drawer when I walked by. And Greg, oh Greg, he had just bought a brand new car on a student budget. Nathan bragged about his latest shopping spree, while I overheard them whispering about liquidating the trust that belonged to me. That was it, the last piece of the puzzle. They weren't just keeping a secret. They were spending what didn't belong to them. I waited until Sunday. Family dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the same meal they made when guests came over, to pretend we were the perfect family. I sat quietly, watching them laugh about a vacation they were planning. Greg wanted to go to Cancun. My mother said, "We can afford it now." And I said, "Funny, because I don't remember giving any of you permission to touch my money." The fork dropped from my father's hand. Everyone went still. My mother narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" I pulled the letter from Judith, the scanned will, the documents, and laid them out like evidence in a courtroom. This money, this trust, it's mine. Judith Hale was my biological mother. And you've been stealing from me since I was a child. Silence. Then, my father stood up, knocking his chair back. "You don't understand." "No," I said. "I do understand. You lied to me. You made me feel like a burden. And now, you're all living off the money of the woman you erased from my life." My mother's face turned pale. Greg scoffed. Nathan muttered something under his breath. But I didn't care. I had already contacted the lawyer, already filed for a freeze on the accounts, already made my move. They tried to spin it. They begged. They blamed each other. But the thing about truth is, once it's out, it doesn't go back in the box. I left that night, suitcase packed, keys dropped on the hallway table, and I didn't look back. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and statements. Turns out, my mother had forged signatures. My father had opened accounts in my name. Greg and Nathan, they were listed as beneficiaries through shady manipulations. But it didn't matter, because I had something stronger than all of them. Proof. The court sided with me. Every asset returned, every transaction audited, and every lie documented. They lost everything they had stolen. And I finally felt seen. I moved into Judith's old apartment. Small, quiet, paid for by her. There were still traces of her in the space. A worn rocking chair, books she must have loved, and a faded photograph of a woman with my eyes, smiling like she'd waited years for me to come home. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fit in where I didn't belong. I wasn't shrinking myself to earn love, or walking on eggshells just to be tolerated. I belonged to someone. Even if she was gone, she had seen me before I even knew who I was. They tried to reach out, eventually. My mother sent a long email, blaming stress, her own childhood, anything but herself. My father left a voicemail once. "You'll understand one day, we were just trying to protect you." Greg even showed up at the building once, yelling from the street that I'd ruined them. But I didn't answer, because their version of love always came with conditions, and I had finally learned to stop signing contracts that only ever benefited them. Instead, I focused on myself, went back to school, majored in social work. I wanted to help kids like me, the ones labeled burdens, the ones erased, the ones taught to feel guilty just for existing. Judith's trust paid for my tuition, and every day I walked into class, I whispered a quiet thank you to the woman they tried to hide. Years later, I visited her grave, alone, no flowers, just a folded letter in my hand. "I know you couldn't be there when I was born," I wrote, "but I feel you now, in every brave thing I do, in every no I say without guilt, in every time I love myself when no one else does." I placed the letter at her headstone, the wind soft against my face. They had called me a mistake, but Judith, she called me daughter. And that one word, that one name, gave me everything they never could.